to address some of my question. What I'm concerned about is redistricting. It seems to be a horrible, horrible issue. Quite frankly, if it wasn't for redistricting, you would be my congressman. Instead, I've got Mr. Sensenbrenner. And I also had my favorite state representative literally taken away from me and moved down the road 10 miles so he can remain in his current position. And this just seems like such a process fraught with potential for nefarious doings, is all I can say.
No, and it is. And again, the double-edged sword, I mean, while it's tougher for us to pick up the assembly right now in Wisconsin because of redistricting, and if you look at on the congressional maps, Pennsylvania and Michigan, I think they're the two best examples where I think out of the, I'm not going to say numbers, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's a huge distorted, I think there's only 5 Democrats out of Pennsylvania or something like that, out of a state that has, clearly the votes are a majority actually in the state, because usually they'll elect statewide officials as Democrats, and yet they have about 1/3 of the congressional seats. And the same is true in Michigan. And if you look at Wisconsin, we had more votes for Democrats, and yet we lost, the assembly and stuff. So while they have that ability, the problem is, and that's the governing problem, is they're always worried about the Tea Party. So rather than, there are adults in the Republican Party who I could work with and get things done. But they're not allowed to do what they have to do because of the Tea Party contingent who threatens their leadership roles and threatens everything else. So that's the reality they're having to live through, but so do we have to live through this. Now what could happen, and my hope is the way you change this, and maybe there's other ways, but the way I can think of is you change the majority. We pick up those 17 seats, not only do we get rid of probably 17 folks, some of them are going to be Tea Party folks, but then they can finally spank the rest of them and say, look what you just did, and they can move on to functioning again. So we haven't had a budget in 4 years in this country. So if you don't have a roadmap, how do you really know where you're going? And that's what the budget is, right? It's your 30,000-foot look at everything. And I love when on the floor, what's his name? Sean Duffy. I always forget. Dave OBC. I don't want to give it away. It's still Dave OBC. But Sean Duffy was talking one day, and he and I were doing a presentation for WisPolitics. And he's talking about government waste. There's a study with shrimp on a treadmill. What a waste that we're studying shrimp on a treadmill. And then I point out then that the sequester that they created, that I wasn't around for, that's hurting the economy right now big time, these across-the-board cuts that you can't have any flexibility on. With that, you cut 5% of shrimp on a treadmill. Just like you cut 5% of Head Start, and 5% of administration of Social Security and everything else. But if you don't do a budget, I'll vote to cut shrimp on a treadmill. You got my commitment right now. Let's do that. But then you have to have a budget where you're going to make cuts, but you're also going to have some revenues, and you're going to invest where you need to invest. But if we don't have that, we govern by continuing resolutions. It's just the worst way, because we're really not doing those necessary reviews. So when you get to something happening like the IRS recently, and I bring it up because it happened in one of my community's jurisdiction, when they were targeting the Tea Party folks that we thought that's what was going on, well, they also were targeting liberal groups, we found out later. The problem is, when you don't have that regular review process, and you just have continuing resolutions, agencies wind up doing things like this. You empower people who've never been voted on to make decisions trying to guess what we meant. So in 1959, when the law said for a 501c board, said explicitly for educational purposes, and then their ruling said primarily, clearly those aren't. We've been dealing with this for what, 54 years? Is my math right on that? Yeah, 54 years. And in the last several years, some people on their own decided this is the way because they don't get any guidance how to do it. Now, it was wrong-headed, a bad approach to it, but they kind of were going after everybody just because the rise of the Tea Party groups, that's kind of some of the groups they tagged to look at. But that's part of the problem when we don't do our jobs and don't function as a Congress. I may not like the budget that comes out, and I may not vote for it, but at least you have a budget that shows a roadmap and people know where we're going with it. One other thing, if I can add, because I think it's important. When I was doing my freshman training, one of the 4 weeks of training we had was at Harvard. And they had someone from the business school come to us. Every year they survey 10,000 Harvard MBAs on certain questions. They got 1,800 response, pretty good response rate. And one of the questions was, companies were starting to make money but not investing it back in the economy. And they said, what are the reasons? I think reason number 2, a lack of faith in the U.S. government. Now, if I was in a third world country, I might expect to have a lack of faith. But the United States of America, because we can't govern Democrats and Republicans, but mainly to the Tea Party folks, it's hurting the economy again. So, those are just some of the things that we deal with because of that redistricting. The Tea Party influence is so huge. And one other little thing that I'm not necessarily advocating publicly for, but when we got rid of earmarks, no one wants pork earmarks, but when you got rid of earmarks, that someone might help move a highway project up a little faster because there's going to be an industrial park building or something like that, you had a way to make people say yes, even those people who love to only say no. When you took away that process, you'll never get those people who like to say no to ever say anything but no. So that's why they can't even pass appropriation bills for things like transportation and the rest, and the farm bill, etc. So it's another part of that problem that when you look at it, you've really taken away the ability for them to get those people to ever say yes.
You get out and around all the time. Are the iPhone zombies going to get the government they deserve?
I'm not sure what you're saying exactly.
Well, everybody's living in a screen that's 3 inches by 5 inches, and they don't look up long enough to figure out that they're getting squashed,
No, I agree. It's interesting. I would like to think that when we take things to the people, like what Move On is doing, or I'm sorry, not Move On, Move to Amend, and other groups, when you do that, that's how you can best, build it from the grassroots up, that we can still influence public policy. We're fighting against big money on the top, right? And big money and citizens and all that's fighting us in one way to try to distort what happens, and then the rest of us have to fight from the other way. But we have the vast numbers of people, and we have the issues. So I'm not too pessimistic. I'm not Bill Maher. Bill Maher is very pessimistic about the American people, and he sometimes makes a very good case, I have to admit, about some decisions that happen. But I've served in the county, government. I've served in the legislature and Congress. The vast majority of people you deal with are, well-meaning, good-spirited, especially from Wisconsin. I mean, we're fundamentally, good, decent people. Do we have to deal with, some of the Tea Party folks that pour out of the election? Yeah, but, I still think that, we've got the ability through the electoral process to change that.
But how close is the money to the tipping point right now? I mean, they're really kind of stacking the deck pretty heavy in one direction. Pretty soon they're going to be out of our
and at some point, and trust me, I mean, we've worried about that for quite a while. It's like I said, we can get outspent a certain percent, and at some point you can't fight that anymore. Part of the problem, though, is it just escalates the game on both sides. And, we were just talking about all those emails where they'll ask for $3 or $5. There's a reason why Elizabeth Warren was able to do some of the stuff she was able to do, because at least she had the grassroots kind of combating, but you're raising the scale to the point that when can just anyone run for office? I mean, 47% of people in Congress, in the House and Senate combined, are millionaires. We have seen, because of that, either you have to be able to come from somewhere, a special interest background, where you're able to raise some of those big dollars, or you're a self-funded candidate. And so I went to one of my freshman colleagues, a Democrat's house, I won't say the person's name. The first week, they did 2 buses take us out to their house, about a half hour outside. I guess I'm really telling who they are, pretty close. But anyway, outside of D.C. That person's house was as big as my block back home. They're worth $400 million. I don't know if I can talk in the same way, even though this person was from my own party, about raising the minimum wage with someone like that, perhaps, than people I dealt with in the legislature, where it was a little different. So it's having a lot of disastrous effects, I think. But at the same time, if we don't participate, that's why that voting is so important to me, that when you block the access, whether it be by photo IDs that seniors and students and low-income people can't vote, you make it harder to do early voting so that people who work 1 or 2 jobs can't go out and vote. You have fewer people at polling places, so you stand in lines longer. Those are all the things that I look at as some of the most fundamental problems, that if I can at least make it so that everyone who can vote, we can still at least fight on that part of it.
On that issue.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think your hand was up first, so.
Yeah.
On that issue, the Supreme Court theoretically threw back to Congress. They're cutting out that part of the Civil Rights Act. Is there any chance that Congress will act on that?
Normally, I would say absolutely yes. Was the last time we reauthorized the Voting Rights Act? I think it was 2006. Am I saying that if anyone's following? I think it's about that. It was unanimous in the Senate and near unanimous in the House. However, think how different 2006 was now because of the Tea Party folks. I think we will have a very difficult time to address it legislatively. Now, luckily, the president's been pretty aggressive in dealing with it through other ways they see they can still enforce it, and they're doing it through the Attorney General's office. But that's part of, again, the problem we have with the Tea Party faction is what should be a no-brainer. Jim Sensenbrenner is an outstanding advocate for reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. Because clearly that was where Congress wanted to be. It didn't change that much since then. So when Jim Sensenbrenner, now you're moderate in Congress, you can tell where Congress is going. You know, so yeah. So I don't know if we can actually do something this session. I mean, what I look at right now is we'll probably pass some sort of a continuing resolution that keeps the sequester in place. I will likely not support that because the sequester is so damning to the economy in the long run. And that's in place for 10 years of sequester. So we have 9 more years of that left. We will probably do something with debt ceiling, which is one of the silliest fights that we have in Congress, because the debt ceiling is merely paying the bills that Congress has already authorized. So you've signed a mortgage, you've written the check, you put it in an envelope, you put a stamp on it, and you're sitting at the mailbox deciding whether or not you're going to drop it in the mailbox. That's the debt ceiling fight. So just visualize that next time that we decide, tell each other how terrible we are. That's what the debt ceiling fight's about. I think the real test to watch for is immigration. If we can do immigration reform, which I'm going to give Paul Ryan credit, and I don't do it very often, but he gets credit for being very consistently saying that we need to do immigration reform. The fact that you've got some people like that who are providing adult voices in that caucus, it came through the Senate in a strong bipartisan way. I think Paul's doing it for a different reason than me. I think that we need to find a path for citizenship. We need to do some of the things that are around that package. I think Paul realizes there won't be a national party ever again if they don't do it. But I think that's to watch. If we can get that done, if somehow we can get by the Tea Party on that, it'll show a path for getting other things done. If we can't do that, it could be a very difficult period until next November. Yes.
Part of the income inequality we're talking about is due to, I believe, so many jobs that have gone overseas. Adults are now competing with children for those low-wage jobs because there's no jobs for them. I mean, they can take retraining, but then what do they have to face after retraining? There's no job. I mean, there's a few, but there's nothing. When I graduated in 1968, Chrysler was hiring 60 people every day. If you quit 2 weeks ago, they'd hire you back. They needed bodies. Lloyd Corporation was hiring. Fairbanks was hiring. Everybody was hiring. And all the little satellite companies that worked around these bigger companies. We had 4 or 5 foundries in Lloyd. Now we have 1 now. And they're struggling. The one in Sheridan does business. Because all these jobs have gone overseas due to low-wage countries, which we can't compete. So many of your budget problems that you talk about, that we're fighting for this budget, we can't get a budget. Many of these budget problems will go away. If we had 40 million jobs coming back here. Right now it's Foxconn in China, the company that makes Apple products. There's 1 million people work for that one company in China. Not to mention India, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, where my apples made. All these places. My new hat is my Navy ship that I was on, made in Sri Lanka. You know. And what do we do to get these jobs back? If you had 30, 40, 50 million jobs come back from overseas, that gone away, all of our television companies, all of our computers companies, all of our founders, you said they're making bridges overseas. I worked for Lloyd Bridge and Iron before I went to Navy in Lloyd. They're gone. Lloyd Corporation's gone. Fairbanks is gone. They can't even make an engine for a Navy ship there. The cranks, the crankshafts are made in Germany. Nothing against the Germans, but we could use those jobs here.
Yeah. I think there's 2 things you can look at. You could have a carrot and a stick approach. On the carrot approach, we should invest more right now. One of the things I'd like to invest more is in research and development, because a lot of the jobs where we can excel, we already have the expertise to do it. We need to invest in what those jobs are. thanks to the universities and all the rest, that right now, the projects that they're looking at, the isotopes, you're going to have actually in...
Most of these projects I'm talking about were developed.
Right, but
We
exactly.
had the
exactly.
expertise.
But so part of it is, if we can continue to provide what we need to for research and development, so companies can still do that and then have the incentives, that's the carrot part. The stick, and it's not really a stick, it's just making sure that our tax policy works. We still provide tax breaks to people to send jobs overseas, and that's a ridiculous tax break. We have all these corporations making money overseas that then have it based out of a different, often an island, for the profits, not to pay taxes here. So they're basically profiting. They use our banks to hold their money because it's the most secure banks. But then in the Cayman Islands, there is a 5-story building that's the home to 18,000 corporations. Each one is clearly about that big. It's just a P.O. box. But they do it for tax purposes. So we have to go after it, because if you don't allow them to do some of those things, it's already starting to be not so financially, so much of a financial incentive to go overseas. Because in China, they're starting to realize by the time you add transportation costs and some of the other quality issues they have, that there's some of that, and their incomes are starting to rise a little bit, so that it's not quite as competitive.
They're
So
up to
some
50
people-
cents an hour.
Right. So
Yeah.
some people
I
are
should
making-
love Sri Lanka at 11 cents an hour.
Right.
But we can't compete with one, really.
Yeah.
Not on an equal basis.
But those are some of the things we can do. So I think through tax policy is part of it. I think, we can not allow, if companies can't benefit from that, there's a possibility. I think we gotta make sure we keep sharing something. I have to leave.
Yeah,
you,
we
but
got a
we're
few
gonna-
more
Even Theodore
minutes.
Roosevelt said that your tariff on your goods that you import should reflect the wages
Yes,
of the
that's another- yes,
country
exactly.
from which they come.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Mine is just going to start out, it's an announcement. On Tuesday night, for those that might not know it, they're going to have a gentleman from Wisconsin Citizens Action here at 6 o'clock. Everybody's welcome to come, and they're going to be talking about the Affordable Care Act. So, everybody's welcome to spread the word, make sure you're here. And then I just want to quickly say, when Mark and I were colleagues in the legislature, there's nobody on the Democratic side that was more effective than Mark Pocan. Even in 2004, John Gard was the speaker, and this guy here, Mark Pocan, could talk circles around that guy. He would twist him up. It was just fun to watch. But then one of the pieces of advice that Mark gave me when I was elected speaker, and in large part I became speaker because Mark said he helped me get there. But I was getting ready to give my speech, and I said, is there any advice for him for me? And he says, yeah, just don't screw up. Now, but he didn't say screw. It was a little stronger word, but that was his advice to me. So anyway, he's a great guy, and he's doing a heck of a job for us. I just wanted to say it.
Maybe I'll wrap, if I can, this way. Anytime you want to reach out to our office, please do. I know some of you are our constituents, and if you're not, it's a little harder. I know how it works, right? Because we all, like to have it. You already have some thousand people you're responding to. But, please reach out to us, especially even if you agree with us on something. Do that, because I'll tell you, we get plenty of people who don't agree with it that can reach out to us. So it's good to have, the balance. Because I think a lot of people assume, that, oh yeah, Mark will probably vote the right way on this. But it doesn't hurt to still have that, in our count for things. But if we can ever help you too, a big part of what we do in the local office is our casework. So we have some regular hours down in Beloit, but we also have the Madison office. We have 3 caseworkers. If you have a problem with the IRS, you have a problem with veterans, you have a problem with any federal agency, even people, if you know someone who's having a problem with foreclosure, that's what we're there for. And to me, those are the things that I find most rewarding, quite honestly, because we're not passing the good pieces of legislation in Congress, but we can really be very effective. And I found that we're that liaison. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes the call from a congressional office to a federal agency to kind of get something expedited. But if that's the way it works, then you might as well make sure that we access it. So please reach out in any way on that. And again, I just want to thank everyone for coming out on a Sunday night. I'm sorry I have to keep moving, but my week is abbreviated this week with having to go back because of the Tea Party. And again, I really appreciate it. No, I saw no one was drinking tea tonight. Thank you. So that's good. But again, anytime, please reach out to us. And it's a great honor to represent the 2nd District in Congress.